All right, so this is the Hurricane Dorian briefing for Tuesday, September 3rd from WFO Peachtree City. And this is Keith Stellman. So main points, and that should be Tuesday. Well, it says Monday at the top. That's Tuesday. Dorian does remain a strong hurricane, and it has begun its movement to the northwest. It has been, the intensity has changed to a Category 2. There has been little overall change to the forecast track since yesterday, and the slow movement to the northwest should continue over the next 24 hours, and it should keep the center offshore, and it is expected to remain offshore. Based on this track, we are expecting minimal impacts to at least north and central Georgia. However, any slight westward jog would certainly increase them, especially across the far southeast. Now, obviously, impacts will be much greater down along the coast. And for those of you that are interested in the coastal impacts, I would urge you to pay attention to both what Jacksonville and Charleston offices are putting out with specific impacts for the coast. Remember that there are going to be impacts occurring far away from the center and far away from the storm, and even beyond the forecast cone, which I'll show in a second. So obviously we don't want to let our guard down. There will be some feeder bands that rotate in as the storm approaches from the southeast. So I'll let this load. This is the latest satellite views, and there's a couple things I'll point out with the satellite views, but bottom line, again, it's now a Category 2 and beginning its movement to the northwest. One thing that you can see, Loop, it's starting to feel the impacts of the trough and the trough digging to the northwest. You can see it on the water vapor up here, the two water vapors on the top of the graphic. Let me get a red pen. There we go. It's starting to feel that influence, and that's where it's moving to the northwest towards it. And we'll see that start to increase with time as it starts to gain latitude to the north. But it is moving now at 2 miles an hour to the northwest, and it is about 105 miles east of Fort Pierce. And ironically, the way the coastline is shaped, if you look at the Florida coastline, it's actually shaped at about the same direction that the storm is moving, and so it's going to remain about the same distance offshore as it's moving to the northwest. It is expected to remain a strong hurricane over the next few days, however. So let me clear these out. Go with that loop. So overview, this is the 11 a.m. advisory. You can see that they have changed the color of the icons from an M to an H, because that M stood for major hurricane. It's now a hurricane Category 2. And again, the latest track forecast calls for a very close encounter to the North Carolina, South Carolina coastline as it's starting to make the bend about the time it's getting up near Charleston. There are tropical storm warnings for the Georgia coastline, and now hurricane warnings for the South Carolina coastline, and hurricane watches that extend up the North Carolina coast as well. So one thing to keep in mind, the track cone still does approach the Georgia coastline, and the South Carolina coastline actually goes inland over South Carolina. It's no longer inland over Georgia, at least the cone isn't, obviously, but the impacts will be obviously felt well outside of that. As of today, or the 11 a.m. advisory, the tropical storm force winds do extend out 130 miles from the center to the northwest, and the hurricane force winds extend out 40 miles to the northwest side. It's much further on the east side, but that's the side we won't have to worry about. The northwest side is what we'll have to pay attention to, and you're looking at 130 for tropical storm and 40 for the hurricane. So in terms of a model uncertainty, I'll pay attention to the graphic on the right first. This is the general model consensus that we all typically see, and you can see everything is in general agreement to the northwest, and then a turn to the northeast with the closest approach to the North Carolina and South Carolina coasts as it's starting to make the bend out to sea. In terms of worst case, I guess you could call it, the GFS and the GFS ensembles, the one on the left, does have it bring the center the closest to the coast, and the consensus is the closest to the coast. So obviously those folks wouldn't want to let their guard down, and that would bring a little bit more impact to us if it does take a little bit further to the left track. And so that's why I'm showing that to you, is that, and that's still within the error cone. If you look at the forecast cone, that consensus still is within the error cone. And I think that's on the next slide. I'll show that as well. And so the biggest question and challenge is how close it does get to the coast as it's making that northwest and eventually north turn. So it will, again, it's expected to weaken slowly over time, but obviously it is expected to remain a hurricane throughout its life cycle. The other thing that's happening as it's weakening, the wind field has been expanding, and so the wind field is much larger than it was this time yesterday, and that's classic behavior for a strong hurricane that's winding down, is that the wind field actually expands. One thing I wanted to bring up and show is a comparison to Matthew. It is been compared to it in terms of how it's paralleling the coast. Dorian, you can see, is a little bit further to the right. However, the Matthew track is within the error cone, and so I just wanted to point that out. But you can see how close Matthew approached the coast as it went up the coast. And if you follow the GFS ensemble that I just showed you, Dorian would get pretty close to that in the South Carolina side where Matthew approached the coast of South Carolina, North Carolina. But for now, obviously it is expected to remain just slightly more offshore than Matthew was in 2016. So in terms of threats overall for north and central Georgia, and this is going to be primarily in our southeastern counties, along in South, Columbus, really I-16 corridor east of 75 is where the greatest threat would be for anything. Wind gusts 25 to 35 miles an hour, particularly Wednesday and Thursday, would really be the biggest threat we would face, particularly with any feeder bands or just wind in general. Rainfall and tornado threat, not typical on the backside of the storm. In fact, much of north and central Georgia will be on the dry side, considered the dry side, the subsidence side. So our weather actually won't be that bad across most of North Georgia. It'll be just in the far southeast where the rain bands may affect them with winds. Tropical storm wind speed probabilities, and this is as of 8 a.m. this morning. You can see 20 to 30% chance in the far southeast, 10 to 20, again, basically east of 75 and then really 16 down the 16 corridor where the greatest threats is, and then increases as you get closer to the coast where it gets up into the 70 to 80% chance of tropical storm force winds down on the coast. The time frame looks mainly Wednesday into early Thursday, particularly into the late hours Wednesday. And again, we're talking 130 to 150 miles northwest side for the tropical storm force winds. And of course, this can change and will increase or decrease with time depending on the track. Further offshore, track takes those probabilities down. A further left track would increase the probabilities, obviously. But no real change from yesterday in the general logic and the thinking in terms of probabilities. Here is the forecast max wind gust that's currently in our grids, and you can see the highest wind gusts are down along the coast. This is, again, Wednesday night into early Thursday, 25 to 30, maybe some 35s thrown in there, 30 to 35 in the brighter yellows. Particularly in our southeastern counties. Again, Dublin, Cordele, over to Vidalia. You guys are over towards Statesboro, where the highest wind gust forecasts are right now. And again, subject to change with a track forecast. If it further offshore, we'd obviously lower them. Closer to us, we'd maybe increasing them. Rainfall, again, not much expected on the backside, primarily upwards of about an inch in the far southeast, with much lighter amounts expected as you traverse west, with the heaviest amounts down along the coast, where 3 to 5 or even higher expected down along the coast, particularly, again, Wednesday night into Thursday, when the heaviest winds are also expected. And so with that, the WPC has a slight risk of flash flooding just outside of our area, but down along the coast primarily, basically the 95 corridor along the Georgia coastline. So in summary, key takeaways, again, Dorian does remain a strong hurricane, and it is moving to the northwest now. That's good news. And it should start increasing in forward speed in the next 24 to 36, but it's not going to be drastic. We're still waiting on the upper level system coming across the north to pick it up and take it out. And again, little overall change in the track forecast since yesterday, with that slow movement to the northwest expected to continue. Again, based on the current track, minimal impacts north and central Georgia. Only our far southeastern counties have the greatest risk, and we'll just have to watch for any westward shift in the track. Would slightly increase the risk down there in southeast. And bottom line, obviously, don't let our guard down, because it's still off the Florida coastline and just now starting to move. So we'll just have to watch and continue. We do plan on doing another briefing tomorrow at 12:30. And obviously, this is when we would be expecting the greatest impacts for us tomorrow into tomorrow night. So we'll do another one tomorrow. And then we have our normal weekly briefing on Thursday. We'll just have to decide whether we're going to continue that with a special briefing or go back to the Join Me series. The slides are available on the briefing webpage, and you can download those, both the PowerPoint and the PDF. So with that, I'll stop the recording and ask if there's any questions.